is the closest thing, but he talks about it as almost as an addendum. It's not one of the central virtues, whereas Christians have constantly pointed back to humility as one of the central virtues. And I think even our understanding of sin, the 7 deadly sins, for instance, starts off with the word pride, the counter to humility. And so when we talk about humility, I think humility has to start off with that Aristotelian idea of being in a balanced position of knowing where you are. And I think in doing that, we have to consider the entirety of reality. And so when we're considering the right place to put ourselves in our life, we have to consider God. We have to consider the fact that we are sinners. And so if we can count ourselves where we are supposed to be in relationship to God, we're much lower on the totem pole than I think we normally feel. But humility is so central to all of Christian life. Relationships especially. In so many places, for instance, in Philippians, Paul tells us that we should not exalt ourselves above one another. We should humble ourselves, rejoicing in good works of other people. In holding up works for other people, the same thing goes in Romans. In Romans chapter 12, Paul tells us that we needed to account other people's gifts as greater than our own. And I think that we can understand this sort of in terms of our interrelationships with our friends. Has anyone had that incredibly arrogant friend that we're still friends with, but we don't really like hanging out with because all they can do is ever talk about themselves or boast about themselves? I've been that friend a couple times. I'm sorry, I hate to admit. But the idea that the arrogant friend is not someone you really want to spend a lot of time with because there's not an interplay, there's not a relationship, there's not an understanding that someone else is important. The only thing that's important to them is self-importance. And I think this comes out terribly in American culture, but also in worldwide culture. Selfishness, I think, is one of the lead, or pride, or just an entitlement, comes out and plays out in marriages to disastrous results. In marriages, if you are too selfish, I'm going to use Courtney and I as an example. I embarrassed her earlier at Pine Level. I'll do it again. I don't mind. Hope she doesn't too. But if I am having a conversation with Courtney and I hold myself as too important, I'm going to look down on her instead of recognizing our marriage as her gift to me. Instead of seeing it as a gift, I'm going to see it as a burden if I am arrogant. Instead of realizing that she is the joy of my life, I'm going to see her as someone as unsuitable companion because I'm exalting myself too high. And how many marriages fall apart because someone starts seeing the other person as they're not worthy of being around me. Maybe that's not the conscious thought, but maybe that plays out. I'm reading a book that was recommended to me. It's called Blink, and one of the things it talks about in marriage is the use of contempt, the emotion of contempt between two people. And contempt, a better way of putting it, is that we believe that they are unworthy of us. It is so damaging to marriage. Now, in light of honoring things about marriage, Courtney has told me that I have apparently been very convicting lately in my sermons, but I have not been very uplifting in my sermons. So I'm going to make an attempt to honor her request to be uplifting. The reason I want to extol humility as a virtue and tell us that we need to grow in humility is because I see every single thing that the Christian faith asks us to have as pouring out of humility. We cannot love God fully unless we recognize what He has done for us, but we cannot recognize what He has done for us unless we've been humbled. Unless we don't have any expectations, unless we feel like we don't deserve to be rescued, being rescued doesn't produce in us a feeling of appreciation. A lot of us kind of feel like we're entitled to the grace of God. We're entitled to His free gift. We feel like that. I feel like that a lot. And I have to smack myself down and be like, hey, no, that's the wrong way of thinking. In the words of Paul, take every thought captive. So when we take every thought captive, we put ourselves in a position of recognizing the incredible things God has done for us, and so we find ourselves able to love God. If we see ourselves as despicable, as unworthy of receiving God's grace, and yet we receive God's grace, we're going to be excited about it. We're going to have a hard time shutting our mouth about it. And in fact, when we see someone else, we're not going to be expecting them to live a certain way or to act a certain way for our concern, because we already understand that we are utterly desperate for saving. And when we see them, we are going to have that perspective. Yeah, they need to be saved too. So we will share the gospel with them, number one. Number two, we can enter into a relationship with them a lot easier. It's very hard to be embarrassed when you're humble. Because there's nothing else. Because all your faults are shown and you are completely exposed. But you don't care because you have a Savior in Christ. Now, that doesn't sound very uplifting, I don't think. But here's the spin around. If you humble yourself, I want you to imagine what your day would be like. If you were to cultivate an attitude of humility, and I think part of cultivating an attitude of humility is cultivating an attitude of thankfulness. How thankful are you going to be during your day? Man, I tell people, one of the things that every day I thank God for is indoor plumbing. I've spent long enough backpacking to recognize the fact that indoor plumbing is a fantastic invention, especially in the winter. I am thankful for my car to be able to drive to get to places. I can't imagine trying to ride my bicycle up to Durham for class. I think they'd have to seriously contract the student passenger circle if we had to ride bikes or horses. I am very thankful for Corbin. I am very thankful for all of you. But I don't think an arrogant person would be able to. And so it's something, be able to be thankful for things that are all around them that have blessed them. They won't see the fact that life is a blessing because they're too busy thinking about what life hasn't given them. So in that note, I want to talk about the last part of Christ's message. In cultivating an attitude of humility, a couple of things that we can do. And the one that Christ gives us is inviting people that are poor, that are blind, that are lame, that are sick. The people that in Christ's times would have been their untouchables. The people that you can't go anywhere near because they are in the